fight is finally over. UFC 292. It's the culmination of the Ultimate Fighter Season 31. And in the finale at bantamweight, we have the Canadian. It's Superman Brad Katona. And unfortunately, New England and Boston as a whole doesn't get a single representative on this card. Rico DeSciullo losing, and he was the lone Boston guy that would have had an opportunity to. The Renegade sticks his own, Cody, Gibson, and both of these guys, UFC veterans. You like to see that. I know a lot of people have been referencing this throughout the week, but Cody Gibson debuted against Aljamain Sterling. It was both their UFC debuts on a card where Pedro Munhoz debuted, and all three of them are on this feature. And if you look at it for Cody Gibson, he didn't have a great run in the UFC. That's why everybody's on the show, except for Timur Valiev. He actually did have a good run in the UFC, and it was quite frankly a surprise that he was on it. But for Gibson, he loses to Sterling. He finishes Johnny Bedford in a very controversial stoppage by Kerry Hatley. Thou doth protest? Well, it was a win for Gibson. He loses a few more. He's beating the absolute piss out of Manny Gamburian. And then it's Gamburian landing a guillotine, and it was in the announcer saying, oh, it's not very tight. And then Gibson taps. And ultimately, he had to grind it out on the regional scene for these long 8 years. He took a long layoff from 2018 to 2021, but he's fought some really recognizable names lately. Fought with ex-MMA, beat John Dodson. That was Dodson's first fight outside of the UFC. He was able to go out there and have a wild and awesome fight with Eagle FC against Ray Borg. First round, Striker's Paradise. Second and third round, Ray Borg wins. But for Gibson, a lot of really good experience outside of the UFC. And for Brad Katona, you guys know him. Winnipeg, Canada's own mechanical engineer by day, cage fighter by night. And he was a weird guy to come into MMA because, and I don't say that like personality wise or fighting wise, but he has a black belt in Shotokan karate from when he grew up. And then he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. But he almost took the GSP route of I did karate, now I'm a wrestler. And you watch Brad Katona fight, he'll strike a little bit. You saw that in the Timur Valiev fight on the season, and we'll get through that quite a bit. But for Katona, it's pretty much, I'll throw a leg kick, I'll counter-strike, and then I will put my wrestling shoes on for 5 rounds if I need to.
And it can make a lot of his fights closer than they probably should be, but that's why I have such a hard time with this fight. If Brad Katona can just fight at his pace, using the takedown attempts to really help open up his own striking, then I could see him being able to go in there, putting a pace on Cody Gibson, and just making it maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing fight of all time, but still negating a lot of the strengths that Gibson brings into the cage. And if Katona is able to do that, I know a lot of his fights have been, like I said, quite close compared to Gibson, who for the majority of the time is going out there and getting pretty good finishes over his opponents. We saw that submission that just happened last night. But Katona, with his steadiness, I think he's kind of got the keys to realize, okay, he could win a 30-27, or he could put himself in some compromising positions, closing the distance a little haphazardly.
And Brad Katona, a really interesting fighter. You folks probably already know it. He won the Ultimate Fighter Season 27. He was able to get the win over my favorite nickname and guy in MMA, the Mellow Fellow, Jay Cuccinello. And he goes out there, 3 30-26s in that fight. He dominated with his wrestling. He got it done. But if you remember from that season of the Ultimate Fighter, he beat your kind of 16th ranked bantamweight right now, Kyler Phillips, and he beat the current 11th ranked bantamweight in Bryce Mitchell. I should say featherweight. But if you look at it for Brad Katona, very, very good wrestling, wins it at featherweight. Now he's trying to repeat at bantamweight. And if you watched him outside of the UFC, and that's kind of the funny thing, Brad Katona loses to Merab Dvalishvili. He gets out-wrestled. He out-wrestles a good wrestler in Hunter Azure in the first round of their fight, but the takedowns don't make it round 2, round 3. Azure's able to have success with his boxing. Azure gets the win. And then when you look at it for Katona, he goes out, he's supposed to sign with EMC, that falls apart, so he goes over to Brave, and I watched a lot of Brad Katona Brave fights. He fights Nikolic, he fights Stepan, then he fights Kuheji, and that's for the belt. And that was a weird fight to watch because the Kingdom of Bahrain look after Brave CF. And if you watch his fight against Kuheji, Kuheji's a Bahrainian fighter, and they always brand fighters as KHK MMA fighters like who is it? At 125 pounds. I can picture his face. I can't picture his name. He's out of Wigan. The UK is undefeated. Mohammed Makayev.
There we go.
Should have remembered him. they always bill him as a KHK fighter because he's with Brave and so on and so forth. But Brad Katona is taking on the Bahrainian in Bahrain for the Bahrainian promotion. And in the first round, I had it for Koheji. It was close, but Koheji southpaw landed a lot of left hands. Katona just throwing leg kicks out there. Katona wrestles. Ultimately, it was a really close fight. I thought Katona had won 2 rounds. Koheji had won 2 and 1 was really close. You could have actually made an argument either way. But Katona's last time out, he takes on Gamzat Magomedov, wins the first round, second round, third round, fourth round, and then in the 5th round, he actually gets taken down. All this to say, Brad Katona is a wrestler to the nth degree. And Cody Gibson's an interesting guy because he was a JUCO All-American twice over at Bakersfield State College. Then he went to Menlo College, one that produced Carla Esparza.
Wow.
Some pretty interesting stuff there. But Gibson, I find when I watch his fights, he's a good striker on the outside, except for when he fought Francisco Rivera in the second round and got dropped once.
Francisco had pop, though. People forget.
Yeah, he was like an oddball John Lineker type.
And they have one of the greatest one-round fights in UFC history. I highly recommend going and watching it.
But Cody Gibson just fought Francisco Rivera, and Rivera was out for that long time, and he's competed with XMMA in multiple different promotions. But Gibson wins the first round. Second round, he gets dropped by a right hand, and then he gets popped by another right hand near the end of the round. In the third round, comes back, gets a submission win. He fought Louis Sadonakis that fights at a TriStar. Got a win there with XMMA. But Gibson, I find, if he's the better wrestler, he has a lot of success.
Definitely.
If he's the worst wrestler, he tends to get held in a lot of positions and he can't really scramble out of them, which is almost like an Austin Hubbard that's in the other finale.
And that's what I think is going to be a really important X factor in this matchup. Can Gibson at least threaten enough off his back to make it uncomfortable for Brad Katona to go for such a high volume of takedowns? We talked about that in the Petroski GM3 fight. It's like, hey, Petroski has all the methods to win this fight, but if he's just giving Gerald Meerschaert that many opportunities to cinch up a guillotine, it is going to hurt his chances of winning the fight. And I do look at this fight a little bit similar to that. Gibson is the more lethal out of the two, especially on the outside. I think he does have the wider variety of strikes because Katona can get caught in, like you said, he'll just kind of throw the jab out there and wait. He'll just kind of throw leg kicks and wait. And if he does find himself waiting on the strikes of a guy like Cody Gibson, it might end a little prematurely for him. But again, it comes down to, can Gibson at least make it interesting on the mat? Because if Katona is allowed to just have 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes of control time from that top position and not really face any legitimate threats coming off from the bottom from Cody Gibson, then again, Katona has all of the skills to win this fight, but I still think Gibson's the more dangerous of the two.
And you did see Katona's first fight on the Ultimate Fighter this year against Vega. He goes out there, he wrestles for 2 rounds, he wins the fight. His second fight, it's a split decision win against Timur Valiev. I watched that fight twice today to get ready for this one. First time I watched it, I had it 30-27 Katona. Second time I watched it, I had it 9-28 Katona, round 1 and round 3. Katona, it looks like a clash of heads, but they never show the replay, and he starts bleeding like a stuck pig. It's all over his face, his torso, everything's bloody. But the thing that I liked out of Katona in that fight was A, aggressive with the striking.
Definitely.
But B, his left hook to the body and to the head either sets up his shot with his right hand, or you think a shot's coming and then he goes with either a right hook or an overhand right. And Katona's striking looked much improved in that one. The other thing for Cody Gibson, when he goes out there and beats Tiuliulin, first 30 seconds he gets a takedown, but Rico slipped, but I don't care. Yeah, right, yeah, you would have won. It was a slip. Conor McGregor, not paying attention to anything Rico said at the end of the episode. But for Gibson, he goes out there, he gets the submission, it's awesome. But he also walked out looking like Judo Dan Kelly.
Exactly.
And he had the knee wraps on. Michael Chandler, after the fight, said, and I quote, "They knew Cody's knee was compromised. So what's Cody Gibson's knee going to look like?" Because they didn't film that show last weekend.
I was just about to say, exactly.
I don't know when they filmed it. So today, I was at Princess Auto. I grabbed a catalog. Hopefully, Cody Gibson was able to get himself something nice like...
Craig's picking out Christmas gifts at the end of August.
Well, you wouldn't need an infrared brooder light, but maybe like a remote control cable. Something for his knee to fix it up. When we have a look at this fight, Matt, we look over on Topology for the total votes, and out of them, 78% going with Brad Katona, and a very large percentage, 87% by decision, 22% at Gibson, 61% by decision. I don't like taking Brad Katona in a fight like this simply because his fight against Vega on Contender Series, on the Ultimate Fighter, I don't see it going that way against Gibson. I think Gibson's a much better fighter.
Oh, yeah.
His fight that I referenced against Koheji that he had, it was awful, but Koheji was able to strike on the outside, which we saw Azure kind of able to do even in the pocket. So I do have Katona in this fight. I have to see kind of what we're going to get out of Gibson with the knees, but Both of these guys are very, very impressive fighters, and for Gibson, he turns 36 in a couple of weeks, just like Kurt Holobaugh, who's in the lightweight season. So who do you have in this one?
I've also got Brad Katona because, again, I think the knee is going to be an issue. And if Gibson could have his takedown defense at, let's say, just like a 60%, I think he could do enough within the fight, even if his takedown defense is at 60%. But with the knee injury, you worry that might go down to 50, maybe even 40%. And if those are the terms this fight is fought under, then I do favor Brad Katona. So hopefully we do get a really interesting matchup. Hopefully Gibson has been able to give his knee a little bit of time to heal, so it's not as fresh of an injury as we just saw this past week, but I do have Katona for the win.
Imported Team McGregor's own Brad Katona. We're both going with him to get the win. I put the asterisks up there on the graphic. The fights are in Boston this weekend. Look out for it. 2 title fights up at the top. Sterling taking on O'Malley. Zhang Weili taking on Amanda Lemos. You're not going to want to miss any of the action. And question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.